G'day, welcome back to Following the Chosen. I'm Ben McKecken from Hope Mornings. Hello, Laura Bennett from Hope Afternoons.
Hello, Ben McKecken from Hope Mornings.
Now we've got that
I
clarified.
just wanted to reiterate that.
Season 5, Episode 2. Laura, your thoughts, feelings, suggestions.
Oh, wow. I mean, here we go. I quite enjoyed this second episode. I think in contrast to the first episode where Jesus had much more screen time, which I do like because sometimes I think, where'd Jonathan Rumi go? What are you doing? Are you off having snacks at the catering table? Maybe.
It does
I
seem
don't know.
like he's on a long weekend while filming is happening, and then maybe he'll be back later on in the final few minutes of the episode.
Also, like Jesus obviously would have been doing whatever he was doing while disciples were doing what they were doing. They would have had in real life, some shared time, some separate time. And I feel like we get a better understanding of what's happening around Jesus by allowing that kind of balance. But what I enjoyed was how they use that here, because when you see this whole episode and all of the other subject matter that it deals with, that kind of climactic moment of Jesus coming in, it's kind of that moment where like dad arrives, like where the parent steps in because something must be done. I kind of like that. And it's a little bit unexpected, given we all know the Jesus turning over the tables element of the Bible. I mean, if you're familiar with it, of course. When he brings out his whip and goes all in Indiana Jones on us, I kind of just think they did that moment differently than what you may have thought they were going to. But I do think it was hugely powerful as well.
We should also point out it was nicely foreshadowed in the episode previous about where this was going, with some issues, quandary, concerns about what's happening in the temple in Jerusalem and how it's being used in contrast to how God would have it used. How did you think it was different to what you expected they would do?
Well, I just think the way they actually delivered the scene was, I wasn't sure how they were going to kind of frame it. And I think as well, the way that this is so often, communicated very much focuses on the way that religion is getting in the way of Jesus' message, that what the Pharisees and the like are doing in this temple space is so against the sacred approach that Jesus would want us to have to that space. And there's also the layered messaging within that of the financial kind of side. Is what happens within the church and religion meant to have a connection to money in the way that it's represented through those kind of religious elements? While that stuff was still touched on, I just think I felt much more in the way they did this scene, kind of like, I don't know if personal attack is the right way to put it, but almost the sort of personal attack on Jesus of that. When in the context of The Chosen, you can see everything he's done up to this point to have people understand who he is, why he's here. He's demonstrated his care, his love, his intention in all of these different contexts. And it's like, yet still, this is what happens against that or in opposition to that. And I just have never looked at that passage of scripture through that lens of almost like, what are you doing to Jesus? Like, don't you get it? And I think that probably speaks to why Jesus behaved in the way that he did. I felt like I kind of got that a little bit more.
It's a very good Don't You Get It episode of The Chosen. The last one, episode 1, a little bit underwhelmed in the through line of belief in Jesus and how far you would go in your belief and following Jesus, your devotion to Jesus. I didn't come through as strongly as this episode is so flat out about opposition to Jesus. And it starts off again, as it seems like all of the episodes in season 5 are going to do, with a glimpse of the Last Supper, which I don't think is being done in order. I didn't have my Bible out and like trying to check off, but I think it's jumping all over the place to match the sort of theme of the episode. And when we then go from that at the start with Jesus talking about the opposition that's going to come the way of his followers, to then the overturning of the tables at the end of the episode, for me, I thought it was a much more palpable demonstration throughout the whole episode of, sadly, what is a very strong reaction to and component of Jesus' life and death and resurrection, that there was such opposition to him and he went out in the face of it. I liked so much of the rage against the machine that was in that tables overturning scene, but I actually wanted it to be even more visceral. I wanted Jesus to go bananas in there, which he sort of did, but some of the editing, some of the interaction with characters, to me, almost dialed it back. It must be a very hard thing, though, to play.
But I think part of the reason why they did that, and this may just be me reading between the lines a little bit, I think the intention is to show that Jesus, even in his expression of the emotion of anger, had I was going to say a level of control, but no, he had control over that. Because a lot of times, and I know my Instagram gets these meme feeds all the time where it's like we're told to be more Christ-like, and the kind of Christ-like that I am is the Jesus, flipping tables. Like, it gives us permission to show that side of ourselves and to be angry about things and to, stand up or whatever, right? Like, it kind of encourages the sassy side of us. But I think, like, there's fun in that, of course. But I think when we're looking at Jesus' behavior here, it's not like this is permission to lose it and get angry. Like, anger is a valid emotion and it has a place, and Jesus demonstrates that to us with this kind of righteous anger. But I think he also shows us in this scene that anger does not get out of control. Like, that his anger is still under the umbrella of his godliness and his own Christ-likeness, right? I think it's an example of how to be angry without it being something that is destructive, right? Because in our lives, anger can totally get out of hand.
That's a good point. It is a very good depiction of, I like that, the control and righteous anger of Jesus. And that's right, in contrast to anybody who thinks that somehow being righteously angry means that you just do whatever and you go crazy with flipping tables and that's all you're doing. Like, you're right, this scene, if anyone does need a masterclass in how to be angry, you might want to go and check out this and see how it's depicted in The Chosen. And then earlier on in the episode, Laura, I thought the incidental interactions that the Chosen team have created were stronger this time round. Particularly, I really liked the dinner or the lunch that Caiaphas and Herod had. So Caiaphas, the high priest, and Herod, one of the Roman rulers. And I thought that captured very well what in the pages of the gospel, as you talked about a moment ago, trying to reading between the lines in the gospel, there's not a lot of information about some of these leaders who were in opposition to Jesus. But here is a great imagined dinner, a lunch, where these two guys are talking from different sides of religion and politics about this one figure and about why they would consider not just him a threat, but do something about it.
And because I think you need to give some of those characters, for the sake of the story and the structure of a TV show, you have to flesh them out a little bit, or where's our investment in their actions going to be? Because that's so often the criticism of some of the best TV shows, or even because within the context of this show, they're our villains, right? You have to have an understanding of motivation and context to have a belief in the fact that, or belief in the reason why they would actually do the things that they choose to do. And I think that's something we've said it a lot on this podcast that I appreciate and that we appreciate about what The Chosen are doing, is how they do fill out the identities and also of these characters, but also do it respectfully, because you can tell they've done their research around the time that the Bible obviously happened. They've done their research about what would be realistic, and they add a modern touch to it for sure. But I think you can see in a scene like that, and also in other interactions, that it's representative of the true kind of nature or true themes that would have been important within that day and age, particularly in leadership and authority and all of that sort of stuff. That translated well on screen to me, I thought.
Be sure to keep getting involved in our conversation on Following The Chosen, letting us know how you're going with Season 5 here into Episode 2, or all of the past episodes. Laura and I have combed through all of Season 3, Season 4. You can go and hear those Following The Chosen episodes, or check us out on YouTube. But let us know. We love hearing from you and interacting with you about the show that we know that you love. You were mentioning there Bible history, and I think this episode, again, I keep contrasting it with Episode 1, and I don't actually think I'm being fair in doing that. It's just that these are the most recent Chosen episodes we've watched. This one stood out to me more. One of the reasons was the way The Chosen is able to bring in aspects of biblical history and then effectively do an explainer before our eyes. This one was about the temple, Passover, sacrifices, how Gentiles, people who are non-Jewish, are involved in that. That's a very difficult thing to try to represent, let alone theatrically demonstrate to us in a drama, Laura.
I know, and I will admit, like maybe I'm just a very bad Christian. I've failed at this whole thing because
Flipping tables.
Look, no, well, like there's some times where I think some of the basics, right, of biblical history and what we sort of quote unquote should know in terms of our Christian faith, some of it, I will admit, I do not always have a full grasp on, because my experience of faith has always been much more around who's Jesus, what did he teach? How is that supposed to affect my life? And so some of the peripheral stuff, which is important about like biblical history and all of these sorts of things, it really sits on the edges of the actual relational part of the Christian faith. But so for me, there is a challenge in watching an episode like this to go, how much of everything else around your faith do you actually know? And what influence is it supposed to have on the relational side, which I think is what The Chosen, again, like a strength that they have because they've done their research, because they have the historical context, they really do show us how having an understanding of those things, of first century Israel and the like, matters to who Jesus was and is, and the ideas that we see continuously represented in the Gospels.
As much as in this episode, it's like maybe the strongest birth of the doubts in Thomas are really starting to flourish. They're starting to burgeon. There's some flashbacks, and we can see a bit more about Thomas, Raymer, Kaphne as well. And then fast forward to where we're actually at in the final week of Jesus' life and the arrival of Kaphne and others who are out to get Jesus. And then there's this mysterious anonymous figure who definitely is Luke, who wrote Luke's gospel. Come on. But all of that's happening around the place. But Laura, the thing that I think will resonate with me about episode 2, apart from Jesus flipping the tables, what you just said there about The Chosen being able to display, and we just talk about it as biblical history, but it's more than that. It's these elements of the way God has interacted with his people throughout time and what those elements have to do with who Jesus is. I like that you were talking about your faith in Jesus, your relationship with Jesus, and how he informs you and how you live. But there is so much about what God has done before Jesus arrived, including within the sacrificial system, including within the temple, including in Passover, that wasn't just these events that, they're loosely related or, they had something to do with what God was doing back then. They have these really, really strong trace elements that flourish in Jesus when you think about the sacrifice that he gave, when you think about the rescue that he provides, when you think about the holy, sacred, perfect worship of God that he lived out and now calls us to in the power of the Spirit. And, Laura, we're still talking about a TV show that's depicting that up on screen in ways that sometimes I find a bit too jokey or a bit too like awkward as you're having some Gentiles talk about what pigeons they're going to sacrifice and stuff. But then, as we're doing here, we can actually have a conversation about, all of that stuff comes through, like funnels into Jesus and then out the other side into the way we live for him. And that's right, we're still talking about a TV show, Laura. Yeah,
and again, as we mentioned on the last episode of this podcast, you come back to, this isn't just a show that's meant to leave you entertained and having enjoyed your couple hours in the cinema. Like it is a show designed to prompt conversation and to prompt a level of impact on your personal life, your personal understandings of faith. And so I think when we measure these episodes, part of the way that we can say whether they did a good job or not, I mean, it's hugely subjective, of course, but I think one of the things to measure in some sense is, what has this made me ask about my own faith? What has this made me consider about, if you feel like you're the person looking at Christianity from the outside, looking in at it, it's like, what has this made me think about the entire concept of Christianity, of Jesus, and the narrative of salvation demonstrated in the Bible? Like that, to me, is part of the success or sort of failure, I suppose, of how we look at these episodes. But one thing I actually want to touch on with episode 2 that we haven't raised yet was what they did with Thomas. I mean, you sort of alluded to a bit of the periphery that they have with him, but he's the character in the Bible that is kind of nicknamed as Doubting Thomas, right? Like we always think about Thomas through this moment where he doubted. And that's kind of become, for all the years in all the Sunday school stories and every sermon ever preached, he's doubting Thomas. And I think how unfortunate for this guy that had a life so far beyond that he becomes measured and identified by this moment of doubt. And maybe that was a frequent thing for him. Maybe it was this just once off. But what I liked about this episode and how they brought more of Thomas's character, yes, imagined character, to the table, I think that really helps us see that Thomas and also each of us, we're more than our worst moment, right? Like we're more than those times where we've had questions or we haven't been sure, or we kind of sit in a side that is maybe viewed a little bit more critically. Thomas was more than that. And I love that The Chosen gave that to us and gave that to him, because we maybe haven't considered those other parts of him if it weren't for what they chose to do.
I love how you're pinpointing those moments in this episode that, yes, clearly I just skated over. And I agree with you now you're pointing that out, because we also forget in the scheme of branding this bloke doubting Thomas, that it's also Thomas, the disciple, who recognized Jesus as my Lord and my God. Why don't we remember Thomas as my Lord and my God guy, not doubting Thomas? And I think you're right that The Chosen, whether they're trying to intentionally or not, it is like they're trying to say, maybe we should reclaim a bit for this guy. Maybe we should do what we can to like give him his due. Because you're right, as a person who his entire life, who knows exactly what happened in it, we put it down to this one moment that we often use in contrast with ourselves. And we try to think about, oh, I don't want to be like that. And yet we don't think about all these other aspects of Thomas, including the bit after the doubt where he did not doubt.
Yep.
No doubt.
This is why we need to read more of the Bible around it.
No doubt. Laura Bennett. We'll be back on the next episode following The Chosen as we talk about the next episode, season 5, episode 3. hopepodcast.com.au or wherever you get your podcasts. We really don't mind where you get them. That's fine. Just subscribe to Following The Chosen. Never miss an episode. If you haven't already, star rate and share. That would be excellent. Get the word out there. Make sure the conversation continues. If you're watching this on YouTube, hello. And write down below all your thoughts, feelings, suggestions about episode 2. And we'd love to interact with that on an upcoming episode of Following The Chosen, where I will continue to be Ben McEachern from Hope Mornings and you'll be Laura Bennett, Hope Afternoons.
I still will be. And I look forward to seeing you again then.